Well, it has been a little while since I've actually done one of these. And it looks like I'm peaking, so let me just turn that down a little bit. Don't need, there we go. That seems like it's probably a little better. Yeah, I mean, normally this has been something that I do, and then for the past long while, it's been something that everybody else is doing except me, which honestly is just how I would have it if I had my choice. So, I want to welcome everybody here. I want to say hi. This is fine too? Okay, well good. Because I was in the red, folks. I was in the red. And this is probably also going to improve the noise floor of my mic. And I also have to tighten this thing properly one day. It's, yeah. Here, you know what? We'll do that now. 1 second. There we go. All right. I've actually, because my monitor arm is now on the opposite side of my desk, so for some reason, when you tilt the mic in a different way, it looks like it was doing that. Yeah, the bot announced properly in the Discord and everything. The bot's been good recently. I don't know why it was misbehaving before, but Seems to be doing all right now, which is what I would prefer. Yeah. So Yiza, you actually can change your name. You don't have to recreate your account. The thing is, yes, you can. We were actually looking into that. The thing is that we were streaming on a channel that was named Jon Verrall, and then we wanted to be streaming to RPG Clinic, and we wanted to see if we could find a way to do that without making everybody resubscribe and all that. So we were actually looking into doing a name change. Unfortunately, we actually registered RPG Clinic a long time ago, so we couldn't change the name to that because the name was taken by us. So we instead moved everyone over here. There were other reasons why we did it that way. Also so that I'd be able to maintain my own channel and my own Twitch presence, because otherwise if I ever wanted to watch somebody on Twitch, I would have to watch as RPG Clinic. And the whole point of RPG Clinic is so that it isn't just me. So, we have that there, which is what's important. Yeah, so honestly, folks, it's good to see everybody here. I'm very happy to say hi, and to see people, because honestly, it's been a while since I've done one of these, and I'm honestly thrilled that I got a chance to watch Kate, Scott, and Liz do their own. It's something that I hope that I can see more of, and honestly, it's going to be up to you to just make sure that everybody knows that that's something that we want. But you just have to tell them. Best place to tell them would be in the Discord. But yeah, just poke them and let them know that you like seeing their opinions and their attitudes and their teachings on all things RPGs, and I'm sure that they'll be able to pick it up. The other thing is, I kind of feel like we need a name for this show, because this show started as being called RPG Clinic, and now that's what the name of the channel is. And I'm wondering, should we keep this name? Should we move on to a different name? I don't know. It's a question for the ages. So we're gonna have to see about that. And we're gonna have to get your opinions on that. But that's a question that's been rattling around in my mind, like whether we need to give this thing a different title. I mean, maybe it's just clinic hours. Maybe that's all it is. RPG surgery. RPG surgery is when I take a game that's falling apart and I try to fix it. Which is actually what this show was originally supposed to be. The idea that we had coming into this was that people would call in with their RPG questions, and specifically if they were encountering something in their own games, and that we'd work it out. And then so that was the idea, and then nobody called in. Which I completely understand. So now it's just going to be like this. This is how it is. And honestly, that's just fine. People manage to come in and they have plenty of questions that they'll come forward with anyway. We just do it in text. We don't do it as a call-in show like we once did. Although we have occasionally had sometimes that sort of happening. That's like talking on the phone. Yeah. I mean, I can appreciate that, talking on the phone. It surprises me that a Twitch global emote has such poor res and that weird white outline, but whatever. Nobody needs it. Nobody needs to listen to me talk. We've kind of made that clear a long time ago. Yeah, it's not. This is not a necessity. This is just something that people can do if they so choose. But it's something that I've been enjoying myself. So I'm happy to see people come on in and talk about things. And what I want to start talking about today, this is a suggestion by Scott actually, who threw it over in the clinic channel. Hey, there you go. You got your name changed properly. Boom. Good. I'm so glad. Yeah, I think you now have to stick with that for 6 months, but there you go. And also, after 6 months, somebody can potentially take your old name for whatever that's worth. Hey, Kate's the one who found the actual link, so good on her for that. So, Scott wrote on the Discord, suggestion for RPG Clinic tonight that doesn't necessarily gel with other recent topics. Checking in on a new campaign. You're a few sessions in, things are going well. What's important to check in on, review, or maybe change? And then the Crosshair responded with, I do that after the third, since it's the cutoff state for changes. Or was it 5 episodes? Or actually, yeah, before the final chance episode, it could work. What I've always, not always, but in my campaigns, or at least all the campaigns that I've streamed so far, I've made it clear to the players that they have, I've usually said 3 sessions or so, but 3 sessions, setting a limit is actually something that I think might be a good idea. 3 sessions is how many times a player can play in a session and then still change anything they like on their character sheet. And the main reason why we have this sort of carte blanche attitude towards making whatever changes they want is because you often don't know what you're planning to do with a character until you actually start playing. We discover as we continue to play about our characters all the time, but it's really in those first few sessions, those first few hours of play, that you discover truly the character that you are going to play, not the character you were planning on playing. It's sort of like when you're preparing for a dinner. You might have a recipe that you've written down, but then as you're creating it, you might realize that you don't have some of the ingredients that you were looking for, or you have you find an ingredient that you were really excited about doing, or somebody calls ahead and says that they actually are allergic to a certain ingredient that you can't use. And so you have to sort of create dinner on the fly. And it's much the same way with characters. You might put everything you want down on a sheet, but that doesn't mean that that's the character that you're going to end up playing, because so many things can change. Do you adapt to what the other players have decided to play as well? Do you change based on the setting or the theme that the game master set out for you? Or do you just realize at a certain point that you misunderstood the system, the rules, the settings, or even your own intentions? All of this means that you do not end up playing the character that you first thought up, which is why I think it's incredibly important to allow players to change what they want in the first few sessions, assuming, of course, that this is a game that's intended to last longer than 3 sessions. To give them that opportunity to really investigate and change what they like. Usually I find that players don't end up changing a ton, but you will occasionally find a player who will say, oh, well, I bought this skill or this magic ability, or I didn't realize that I couldn't spend experience on characteristics after character creation, or whatever, and then find themselves trapped because now they've wasted some of their resources into something that they didn't understand or that they no longer want. As a result, this can get frustrating. And so I allow this sort of change in my games because I don't want anybody to feel stuck with a character that they don't want. It isn't necessarily an opportunity for min-maxing, and believe me, you'll be able to see it if somebody then decides to make a whole lot of changes strictly to position themselves mechanically better than they were before. But you don't want to end up saying, oh, but I thought that I was going towards a poison build for my character, and then I ended up buying all these skills that I thought interacted with poison, but now I realize they do not. The other thing that you'll find is that people will realize that elements that they've put into their backstory no longer fit. Ranty Catchdog says, I usually make up just a concept of a character, like what's his or her profession, lifestyle, but the actual personality builds itself in the first few sessions. At least that's how it is for me. And Silvery Phoenix says, I played a superhero TTRPG recently. You can pick any powers and buffs that are available up to a limited cost. Too much choice right from the off. I wanted to use an ability to attack multiple enemies, but realized after that was a separate ability. So this is 2 different particular approaches that can end up finding some issues with the characters themselves. So Silvery Phoenix first, realizing after the fact that the mechanics don't work the way that you want can feel pretty badly if you were going to fulfill a specific fantasy of yours. If the fantasy was, I want to be able to attack multiple enemies at once, and then you find out that you can't, then you've already limited what your character can do that you wanted them to be able to do from the beginning. So it makes sense that you'd want to be able to change that or alter what you've put down for the character in order to improve your chances of playing the character that you want. What Ranty Hedgehog says is making up a concept of a character, profession, lifestyle, and such. This is part of the reason why I really encourage people to not write lengthy backstories for their characters. Because sometimes you'll find that when you start playing that character, the personality is different than what you envisaged. But if you have already written everything out about this character, if you've already made all of these choices, it can be difficult for you to go against yourself, and you may feel like you've locked yourself in. If you've written all of this stuff in, 10 pages of backstory, then it's kind of like you've put in effort and you no longer wish to change that effort. One of the things that's very common in design is the idea that when you are designing something, you want to make the least amount of work possible for yourself. So if you've made a decision, your other decisions will, by default, support that first decision so that you feel like you don't have to go back and change that first decision again. This is often a fallacy or a trap, because if you waste all that time creating something that ends up making you terribly unhappy afterwards, then a little bit of work is going to be worth it in the long run, considering that a lot of the time when you're playing a character, you're playing that character for hours and hours and hours. Even if you're only, say, playing 5 sessions with a character, but let's say that you run long sessions, maybe 5 hours, maybe you devote a day to it. That's still 30 hours that you're going to spend with that character. Is that right? No, 25 if it's 5 hours and 5 days. I even forget so let's say 5 hours, 5 days. So that's 25 hours that you're going to spend with this character. Do you really want to spend 20 hours in advance writing everything down about that character only to find out later on that doesn't apply to you anymore? So yeah, find a way to do this. And that's why session 3, after somebody's had a chance to play in my games, session 3 usually means about 8 to 9 hours of play. Once you have 8 to 9 hours of play under your belt, I find that that's a lot for a player, or that's enough for a player to figure out exactly where they need to make their changes. So it's also time to check in with your players, not just about their characters, but how they feel about the game in general. I mean, you can always be checking in. Always be checking ABCs, right? It's like the equivalent of using your word hole and all of that stuff that we've already mentioned before. But session 3 is kind of crucial because now you've played for a long period of time. You're getting an idea of what the story is going to be. You've got those first session jitters shaken. And now it's time to evaluate what your players have expected and what they're actually receiving and what they might want in the future. It's possible that after 3 sessions, nobody's feeling the game and people are just not willing to speak up about it. And in that case, you want to find out sooner rather than later so that you can do something about it. It might be that you are all having a wonderful time, but people are starting to realize that the game that you're playing isn't the game that they were expecting, but they want to make sure that you know that this other direction is what they want, is how they've preferred to play from now on. All of that is important to check in with for session 3. This is a critical time because not only are you locking your players in if you're following the 3 sessions lock for their player character sheets, but once they lock in, you want to make sure that they also have told you what they feel, or if there's concerns that they have even about their player characters that you want to then hold on to, maybe even let them extend the amount of time they have to edit their sheets. I should point out, of course, that if you are letting your players edit their sheets, then they have to do it using the rules provided by the system unless you've decided otherwise. So if the system says, for instance, You may spend experience on characteristics, such as for Genesis or for Fantasy Flight's Star Wars games. You can't then say, okay, well, now you can spend all the experience you've earned even after the game started on characteristics. It's create your character using the character creation rules and then add on the experience that they've gained afterwards in the sessions that they've had to make sure that everything is okay in that particular respect. But yeah, I mean, does anybody out there, have you used a similar format for your games where you allow some flexibility in terms of people's character sheets? My calendar is trying to warn me that I have a meeting, which I do not have, so stop it. Let me just make sure that I don't. I do. I have like 8 versions of my calendar open, so let me just close all of them. That was 3 separate times that it was trying to tell me that I had a thing, but that's because I had 3 calendars open. This is what happens when you become addicted to tabs and you have all the memory you could want in your PC. You just let it go. And that's not necessarily a good thing. So, so we adapt. We move on from that. But yeah, if this is something that you've used in your games, then I'd like to hear. I haven't participated in games that use that kind of systems. I think it should be in every play now that I've seen how well it works. It's something I will definitely consider when I master games. So it's not something that I've found players have abused. I find it more that it gives players the courage to make the characters they want to make. Scion is doing the whole swapped around dots between sessions. I mean, Scion has got some interesting ideas to it. It's specifically 2nd edition Scion. And the idea of swapping around dots between sessions, I'm hoping doesn't just end up getting too confusing. I need more memory. I mean, I shudder to think, because when I built this PC, I invested in it, which I believe you should if you can. And I shudder to think of what's going to happen when I need to get a new PC, because it'll be embarrassing how much of a difference there is between an old PC and a new PC. It typically is, but it's also embarrassing just how much I care, and I shouldn't. But anyway, too many tabs. You're on 320. 320 tabs? That's a lot of tabs. And I hope you're not running Google Chrome, because otherwise, yeah, that's going to be a ton gone for you. Yeah, 1st edition for Scion was interesting. I like the setting for 1st edition Scion. I was totally in, and the setting was just like, it's essentially, they could have literally said, this is American Gods, the role-playing game, and that would have been, enough. But its systems were way out of whack. So 2nd edition, I'm hoping people are finding more fun with it. We were considering Scion at one point for RPGClinic, and then we decided against it, as we'd previously mentioned, because in a public setting, it's difficult for us to be culturally sensitive across the board with a game that essentially demands that you are dealing with the religious beliefs of various peoples. So, when I say like that it gives players courage to play the characters that they want, it's also that there can be choice paralysis when creating a character. The idea that you're like, if I don't do this perfectly, then I'll have screwed myself for the rest of the game. And I think that that's a better way of doing that is saying, well, like, you don't have to commit right away, but you can try it and see what you like. Kung Fu Fenders, I migrated to Edge, and I'm actually much happier using Edge now, which I wouldn't have necessarily believed a few years ago. But yeah, I'm much happier using Edge right now than I am using Google Chrome. But I also have to keep Google Chrome because I use Google Chrome for work. So and that's a work thing that I'm required to do, as opposed to I don't have that choice. But c'est la vie. And so far I've found that it'll work out for me, that I just swap back and forth between the 2 browsers when I need to. But yeah. So in the end, session 3 is a crucial time. It's a crucial time. It's kind of like a crossroads for a long-running campaign. Because I think that it is actually important at a certain point for you to make sure that players are okay with things, and then you kind of also need to lock things down. And the reason why you do eventually need to lock things down is because you want your players to then stop worrying about the baseless form that is their character, and then start worrying about the evolution of their character. If you don't ground them in that sort of beginning attitude, if you don't ground them in that evolution attitude, and they're always wondering how they can tinker their existing sheet, then they can't commit, and then they can't evolve and move forward. So there does have to be a cutoff point. Right now, I use session 3. It's possible that may change for me in the future, but I feel like session 3 is a good time. Now, note that it's between session 3 and session 4 that for me it locks. It's not at the beginning of session 3 that it locks. So they get 3 sessions, and then they get to make their changes before we end up making any other specific alterations to what we have. And I forgot to start recording, so this is just going to be another YouTube export from Twitch. Way to go, me. But that's all right. I'm not that terribly concerned about it right now. Export-tastic. Can probably do that. Yeah, there we go. It concerns a group of female programmers running into a scion of a death god who is using a new multiplayer game to rise spirits of dead warriors into a worthy fight and make an army of dead fighters help them storm the island of immortality. Well, if you've ever wanted to integrate esports into Divinity, there you go. You've done that right then and there, and you should be proud of throwing that down there, because I think it's a pretty solid. It's a pretty solid pitch. Like that as a log line is kind of cool. So, but yeah, I wish that I had more experience with Scion than I do, because I do think it's an interesting concept for a game. I think it would depend for me a bit on what kind of RPG system I play and how complex it is. Some games like Exalted have so many things to choose from for the characters, it can overwhelm especially new players. I think I would set a later session than 3 for those. So at the same time, I feel like Exalted, while it is very complex and has a lot of moving parts to it, obviously your mileage may vary and you should choose the correct number for your own games. But I still made it 3 sessions for Exalted, and the main reason that I did it for that is because I also want players to commit. You don't want to encourage people starting to funnel all of their ideas and all of their characters' abilities and foci into one area, and it becomes very tempting to do that once they've had a lot of time to play, especially with something like Exalted, where you can sort of start saying, all right, well then I will go down the charm tree. If this is 2nd edition, there are trees all over the place. 3rd edition, it still kind of exists, but it's more nebulous. But yeah, strange. So Silvery Phoenix says, would you put limits into session 3 rules depending on the system used? Changing class in D&D 5th edition, that's quite a major shift. No, because I think that you should be able to make changes. Now, one thing that I will say though is that if you come to me with a character who is somebody who deals with a lot of mechanical items, is very much sort of like from an industrial city and has that kind of attitude, and then the next day you say, well, I realize that I don't really want to play an artificer, I kind of want to play a druid instead, I might suggest that at that point they create a new character. I would still let them keep any experience that they'd accumulated, but if the character has shifted quite dramatically, then at that point generally I'll be like, okay, well, make a new character at this point. Start from scratch. And you can even maintain elements of their backstory if it's something that they can do. But oftentimes, if there's like a class-based system, like you can find in D&D, your class is strongly influenced by your background. So changing your class means that your background probably needs to change as well. But I would let people change class, because if it's not the kind of class that they were enjoying playing, then yeah, I don't want to lock them into that. I don't want to force them to continue to play a class that they do not wish to play. And sometimes you'll find that also somebody will come in and say, oh, well, I really wanted to play sort of like a rogue type character, but if every other person in the party also has rogue type abilities, and you find that you don't really get a chance to have a spotlight moment for yourself, then maybe you don't want to play a rogue anymore. And that's something that you only found out after playing a couple of sessions with everybody else. Or what happens if you are playing in a game where you don't know the game master very well, and you make a character that's all about negotiation and very little combat ability at all, and then the GM kind of makes it clear in the first 3 games that it's going to be, most sessions are going to involve like 75% combat. Well, at that point, you might feel pretty badly about the character choices that you've made, because you've shut yourself out of 3/4 of the game when you thought that it was going to be less. So it may be at that point an opportunity for you to make those shifts that you needed, but that might involve changing a character class. So it can be tough to force people to stay in certain things. Now, I will say that if you put limits on character creation at the start of the game, you probably should keep those limits for if somebody wants to change things. If you say, I want everybody to know that this is a world where we're going for a very magic light campaign, so I don't want anybody to create a character that uses arcane magic, don't let them after 3 sessions be like, well, I think I'll make an arcane wizard at this point. Like, just obviously that's the sort of thing that you want to make sure that players don't try to test your limits by changing things after the fact. It's still the same universe. Ranty Hedgehog says, true, commitment to something forces them to really keep their mind on how they want their characters to work. Too much time to think about stuff can sometimes make a decision hard to set on. You sometimes just have to sit down and start actually doing the work. And in this particular case, doing the work is playing the character. So, Mandicake says, I can't count the number of times this advice would have helped a campaign. It's a thing, it does surprise me sometimes. Sorry, I've been sitting in this chair all day, so I just have to make sure that I shift around to keep myself comfortable. It does surprise me how often people will play in a game and they cling to things that specifically make things not fun. The only reason why a lot of people make make rulings that say, no, you can't change things, or you're stuck with with the consequences of what you've chosen at the beginning of the game, is an adherence to form, and that's not necessary. Your campaign is about people having fun. At its core, playing a game is about entertainment. Now, it is possible for people to use role-playing for other purposes, but that's not what we're covering here, right? So we're not covering role-play as part of therapy, or role-play as part of, spy training. What we're covering is role-playing as a communal storytelling activity, and in the end, what really matters is if everybody has fun. It's possible that you'll all sit down, start playing, everybody just starts talking out of character, the conversation gets really interesting, everybody's totally into it, and you leave the game behind, and you still walk out of that session feeling like you had a fantastic time, because in that moment, what you needed was not to play a game, what you needed was to talk with people, and that's totally fine. But if you're playing a game, and you're committing to a game, make sure that you make that game work for you, and not the other way around. It's strange to deliberately reduce somebody's fun because of the rules. Every game manual these days, every modern game manual anyway, specifically spells out the idea that the rules are in service to the game is not in service to the rules, and therefore you should change rules if you believe that that's important. And that's a common thing for games to point out. But thanks for coming in, Hedgehog. Appreciate it. But honestly, there's a real problem with games where people kind of assume that because it's printed text in a book, that means that it's required. And you'll see this a lot when you stream games. So, when you stream a game and people tune into the game, admittedly, one of the reasons why people will tune into a game is because they want to see one of their favorite games played by another person, to see their take on it, to see how they enjoy things. But the more that somebody deviates from the source material, the more that you'll find that their audience may turn against them. And to a certain degree, that's completely understandable. But to another degree, there's a little bit of, don't forget that the reason why those rules are in the book in the first place. We can change the rules if we need to, because we want to make the game fun for the players. Same thing applies to setting. Same thing applies to basically anything that surrounds the game itself. And when you stream, though, you kind of are basically putting yourself out there, and not everybody wants to play with the sort of house-ruled version that you've put in. It's part of the reason why Critical Role's chat is so incredibly toxic. I mean, aside from the whole, racist, misogynist, sexist situations that you'll run into with your standard internet trolls, there's also the common thing of they're not playing correctly, when in reality what they're saying is they're not playing the way I want them to play. And that's a pitfall when it comes to streamed games. You do not have to worry about that for your own games. You don't have to impress anybody except for yourself and everybody who's sitting around that table, whether you're a player or a GM. So make the choices that are important for you and for your game. You do not have to impress anybody else, because as I've also stated in the past, the amount of times that somebody actually wants to hear about the nitty-gritty of your role-playing game if they weren't present is quite low. That's a personal story that you've created with the people sitting at your table. It is not something that needs to be shared with everybody, and so therefore you have a lot of reign to do whatever you want to make sure that it's the game for you. Have I ever ended a campaign when it turned out that people did not really like it? It depends on what you mean by ended a campaign, Kung Fu Fenris. I have ended a campaign where by the time it ended, a lot of people were really frustrated with the game itself. That is especially true of a long-running LARP that I co-ran, where it just sort of felt like we were keeping it going because players wanted to have something to do, because we were running it every other Friday night. They wanted to keep playing because they enjoyed seeing everybody as friends, but the game had grown a bit stale for them. People were dropping out of the game because they just weren't into it as much anymore, and because there were fewer people, that meant that a LARP that once had dozens of players now only had a handful of them, and so it sort of changed the dynamic of it. And when we ended it, it was because we had kept it going for too long. LARPing on a bi-weekly basis is a lot different depending on the kind of LARP that it was. This was a Changeling the Dreaming LARP, and it was more kind of it was a bit more of a casual LARP in that it wasn't it lasted Friday evening, so it was basically from 6 to 10-11 p.m. We at one point we had closer to like 40. That was like at our peak. But like that's also what we kind of wanted for that game. You don't always necessarily have to have a ton of people in a LARP for it to work properly. But when you are used to having 30 people show up to a LARP and then only 10 people show up, it really changes things. So yeah, that I have ended a campaign when it turned out that people didn't really like it. Now the other thing is that you'll sometimes end a game and then people will gain the courage to speak up once the game is over. I have run into this phenomenon myself where I'll have a player who after the fact has convinced themselves that they didn't really actually enjoy the game. And some of this is because there's an unfortunate reality that people will recontextualize their experiences to support the narrative that they would prefer to have happened. And if somebody was playing a game, but they were there, and I'll give you an example actually. I've run a game where two of the players had a falling out. And then one of them eventually claimed afterwards that they didn't really enjoy playing that game, and the only reason that they were in the game is because their partner was in the game. And then once the two of them broke up, this person felt like they didn't need to hide the fact that they didn't like playing that game in the first place. Now, I can't convince them otherwise, but I can challenge that perception. There is, unfortunately, a tendency, like I said, for you to recontextualize your past experiences to support the narrative that you'd prefer. And I really got the impression that this player was enjoying the game significantly at certain points. But, of course, the whole experience was soured after the fact because they inextricably tied this game to their partner. So, yeah, screw you. I didn't want to date you anyway. Yeah, they did just drop another Mind's Eye Theater Changeling. I remember that I actually participated in a beta for it at one point. But is it actually like straight up released now? Because that would be an interesting thing to find. Right? Kung Fu Fenris? Maybe it's not available just yet. That was By Night, right? By Night Studios? Oh, it like just came out. Interesting. Well, now I'm gonna have to have a look at that. Yep, there it is. I'm gonna have to have a see. I'm gonna have to take a look at it. I remember that there were some issues that I had with the beta, but nothing that I thought like broke the game. Just more like things that I didn't prefer. I can understand them dropping the inanime. I often drop the inanime. Not necessarily a proud thing that I admit, but I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess I'll have a look. Right now, it's $40. Oof, it's a bit dear, but we'll see. People deserve to have their work paid for, obviously. So yeah, that's a thing that I could look into. When I was running Changeling, we used our own homebrew system. We did not use the Shining Host, which was the Mind's Eye Theater at the time. So I'm glad to hear that it's worth the money. Like that's good. I'm pleased to hear that. So we can I'll have a look. But yeah. So when you have a player who kind of comes at you with a, well, I never had fun in the first place, examine yourself. Don't ignore or dismiss somebody out of hand, but at the same time, understand that people can and do change the way that they feel about things after the fact. And sometimes people have another agenda. So you had to drop running your 7th Sea game? Why is that? just not enough time, or after the 4th session? Yeah. Part of the reason also why session 3 is an important one is because I find that usually that's around the time that a game that's collapsing under its own weight because people aren't into it, cancel it. It's kind of like where you find out that things aren't working. Often is session 3. No inspiration for the main plot. I hear you. It's not always easy to work those sorts of things out. So I totally understand. Are you leaping? Are you going to leap, grab a chandelier, swing across the room, stab somebody? Is that your 7th C imitation there, everyone? Yeah. 13 playable kith, 19 different arts. Yeah, I'm going to see this. I'm going to have a look at this. Well, I have some more reading to do. Always more reading. Always more game stuff to read. Always more things to look up. But I can't say that that's a problem. Throw my dagger at the chandelier rope to drop the falling chandelier on an enemy while I land on the counter of the bar and steal a swig of beer. Well, I mean, now we already know. Now you're just 7th C right there. And I need to play it a bit to recharge my batteries. So recharging batteries is another question that kind of comes up a lot, is the idea that, like, can you sort of like burn out? And I think that you just have to listen to yourself for that. There is no advice that I can give you other than to listen to what you need. And if what you need at the moment is to not run games, don't run games. If what you need at the moment is to try running games, even though you're always a player, then run a damn game. Like, just go ahead and do it. Nobody's stopping you from running a game. Even if you are currently playing in a game and you wish that you were running a game for that group of people, then offer to run a one-shot. Offer to run a campaign alongside the one that you're already playing in. But the main trick is that if you find yourself burning out, your best bet is to listen to yourself and find out what you need to do to feel better. And that could mean taking a break. It could mean saying, hey, I can't play for this week. It could mean I need to end this campaign so that I can move on from it because I'm burned out on this particular campaign. It may be that I need to take a break from running games for a while. I stopped running games for a long period of time. Basically because I was busy doing other things. I was not involved with the same player group that I was involved with before, so I was not as interested in trying to like recapture that, and it's eventually that became something that I needed to listen to for myself. Was when I wanted to run games again, that's when I started running games again. But you can't let yourself get forced into anything. This is a hobby. It is a game. It is not a job. Nobody is paying you. And if you're being paid for it, then congratulations. But you can also quit a job if it's something that you don't feel like you want to do. And if you are struggling, specifically if you're struggling because you find that you're lacking in inspiration, it's okay to tell your players that. It's okay to straight up say, I would love to keep running this, or I would love to run this game that you want me to run, but I just have no ideas for it right now. And whether your players can help you with that or not is kind of a question that only you can answer. But there's nothing that says that you must do something when it comes to role-playing games, other than, be safe, be conscientious of your player's safety and your own safety, and don't do horrible things that will emotionally scar and traumatize people. I mean, don't do that. But otherwise, you just have nothing to answer to except for your own safety and well-being. And I say this knowing how hard it can be to answer that advice, or to follow that advice. I have been in a position where I have forced myself to continue running a game because I felt like I had to, because I felt like I would be disappointing people if I didn't. And what I was really doing was disappointing myself. Now, it's not to say that, like if you wake up one morning and you're just not feeling it, but you force yourself to go to the session anyway, and then you find out that you have a good time. I'm not saying that the instant that you're questioning whether or not you really want to do something, that you immediately quit and leave everything behind and burn all the bridges behind you. One thing that I've heard a lot of players report is that oftentimes they don't want to make it to a game because it involves things like leaving their house, although these days that's less of a concern. They don't want to leave their house, they're tired, they worked all day, but then once they arrive, they remember about how much fun they have, and they remember about how they regain that energy because they're now interacting with their friends, and it becomes easier for them to handle. Sometimes you do need to just remind yourself a little bit about like the reasons why you do something. But if it was just as simple as saying, I don't feel like it, okay, I'm not going to do it, then also remember that if you don't commit to something, it may not give you the same kind of joy that if you did commit to something. Treating a game in an extremely casual sense may end up making you not enjoy that game. And in which case, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't show up to game because you don't think it's going to be that fun, and then you don't remember the game being fun because you just never show up to game. So, it's a thing. Everyone says, I've been in a game where the DMs sort of painted themselves into a corner trying to connect plots together, and we've gone on hiatus till they figured it out. It's okay to go on hiatus. It's okay to just admit to your players, I am struggling with something and I need to fix it, and I hope that you will bear with me while I attempt to do so. Because that's all that sometimes is necessary. You don't need to present a front to your players. You do not need to put yourself on a pedestal, to separate yourself, to sort of make yourself this mystical figure. You're allowed to be human, and you're allowed to talk to your friends because they are your friends. You're allowed to tell them how you feel and what you're dealing with. It's okay. And it's okay to admit some amount of weakness. And I know that this is something that a lot of people struggle with in their day-to-day lives, let alone their gaming lives. But sometimes it's as easy as saying, I need help. I require assistance. Rubric Wall says, I think game breaks are important and should be done before they become necessary, and I completely agree. I mean, let's say I think they should be done before they are past necessary. But yeah, take breaks when you believe that you need to. And that's also part of the reason why RPG Clinic has shifted to a season model. Because now we have the ability to say, okay, well, for a while, we're not going to play in an extended campaign. We're going to play one-shots. We're going to do other things. We're still going to be able to be there and create content and be there for the audience, but we don't necessarily have to always be on. And also, specifically, I don't always have to be on as the game master or storyteller. Because it can be draining. It can be really difficult. So, yeah, I do think that taking a break is important. Now, we try our best to remain on a regular schedule here because we do have to keep a schedule because otherwise people kind of filter out. I mean, that's also part of what happens with regular streams. My personal channel, because I have to commit to a schedule now, because if I don't, no one knows to show up. Nobody actually knows, oh, this is what's happening with this person at this time. And it's the same with RPG Clinic, right? Like this particular information session, if we did it on the regular and we made it clear when it was happening and we had a set time for it and all that, then it would be a bit easier for people to show up. But we also recognize that when we do this, we're doing this because we want to, and we're not forcing ourselves. Just like any other game, we've all kind of made that sort of pact that when it stops being fun, we'll stop doing it. And don't worry, I don't foresee any situation where it will stop being fun. But that's just kind of the way it goes, right? And I would hope that that's what everybody would do. When a game stops being fun for you, do something about it. talk to somebody about how you might be able to make that game better, or if that game is unsalvageable for yourself, you can quit. I still maintain that quitting is one of the smartest things that anybody can do when it comes to a role-playing game. Because if you think that you should quit, there's a good chance that maybe you should. Now, exhaust your other opportunities first. Talk to your game master, or talk to your players, or talk to your fellow players. Make changes, make big shifts, try something to bring yourself back into a game. But if the game is not for you, that's okay. Kung Fu Fenders, I appreciate it, but there's plenty of great content out there. I mean, hell, now you can look to Kate, Liz, and Scott for good content for RPG Clinic. It doesn't just have to be me. But if something is not working out for you and you quit, not only are you essentially saying that you are making a choice for yourself, but you're also relieving the burden on everybody else to try to carry you in that game, to try to make that game fun for you. Now, it's a burden that people should accept gladly. After all, it's important for everybody to be having fun at a table, not just you. But if a game just isn't for you at all, then everybody will have to be bending over backwards in order to try and accommodate you. And if you realize that and relieve them of that responsibility, then they can focus on making the game more fun for them. I mean, you can look to us for content. Good is another matter entirely. Yikes. Yikes. I wouldn't hang out with you if I didn't think that you were good people. So maybe that's all that's needed. Maybe that's all that's required at this point. So yeah, I'll also make sure that people know that if you have any questions about role-playing games, whether it's your role-playing game or whether it's about role-playing games in general, or if you have any like hot takes that you just need to get off your chest, or any really pressing advice that you think that you want to give somebody, just throw it out there in chat. That's what we're here for. Humanity. Well, humanity needs to get its act together, but I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to do that at some point. My hope and wish. Hot takes. I'm looking forward to finding a game to bring my pre-made character into. Yeah, that's, it's funny. That could be considered a hot take, but I'll also point out that that's also just, that's something that everybody should just know and do. Just don't do that. Just don't. It's also why I would really, really, really strongly recommend that you not take your existing character from another game and then put them into a different one. I've almost never seen this work out the way that somebody wishes. Because what they typically do is an old character comes with old baggage and old expectations, and it's very hard for you to wrap yourself around all that. In much the same way that I don't want to see a 10-page character backstory. If you've played 100 sessions with this character before, and then you're bringing them over into a different game, a different universe, and expecting things to work the same way, it won't. There's a reason why ports take a long time to develop and design, if you're doing it correctly, and it's the same here. I have my level 7 bard I want to find a game for. No! See, now what I really want, this is what I would have wanted. I would really have loved for Kate to bring that up during her RPG clinic and for her just get really mad and like shout at the camera and just like smash her fists against the table. For some reason, I really like it when people just like devote themselves wholly to their hot takes. Of course, then again, I was also somebody who ended up doing a all hot takes episode, so. it's collect some hot takes to do. See, that's what we should be doing, right? Like I should have a hot take segment where I'll pause it and somebody can like videotape themselves doing a hot take. I've seen some dude play his own Eternal Champion reincarnating in cross campaigns against the will of cosplayers in game. He always named them something related to Flint. Yeah, hot take plus. Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I'm doing with my new DM. The way we made it work is that it's the same character, build characters, etc., but with a different background and a different universe, an alternate version of them, essentially. So Silvery Phoenix, I do not mean to come down on you, because if you're making it work, then clearly you're fine, and that is awesome. But I would still say that my experience, and this is again just my experience. Oh man, we totally should have a hot take counter. Why on earth don't we have a hot take counter? I mean, if everybody's on board, it is fine. But in my experience, it's if somebody says, I want to take an old character and bring it into a new game, or I want to take a character that I've made and I'm just waiting for the right game to put it in, is that character comes attached with expectation. And that expectation is not, you can't live up to it. You really can't in a lot of ways, because the hype builds up in your own head. Oh, I can't wait until I get to play this character again. It doesn't really work that well. I mean, I think we could probably, everyone don't put ideas. So Zesty says, have you considered legacy items like inherited items from previous campaigns as a basic bonus item? So there's a difference between making reference to a previous campaign and just bringing over a character whole cloth. References can be really cool and really interesting. It's sort of like, hey, remember that we have this shared history and this shared past that we care about together. That is something that is completely fine to interact with and deal with. But a whole character, is a different matter. It's a big deal, and it can be a bit rough. And even recently I have tried to make it work, and I don't think I was as successful as I wanted to be. My linking together the Changeling campaign and the Exalted campaign in that kind of like tangential way, I don't know whether it worked out the way that I wanted it to. I think it created some interesting spotlights, but then I realized that I had to pull way back very quickly, because it was making a lot of assumptions that I didn't want to necessarily put out there. It was one of the storylines which I dropped from the game because I just felt like it was not, the players were not responding to it well. So, you can put references, but references to characters, it can be rough. Now, you want to throw something in a game, like if I was running another Changeling campaign and I wanted to throw in a treasure that I put into the previous campaign that I really liked, sure. But that's because you can also make it vague, and you can kind of be like, yeah, this once belonged to a great troll warrior who had difficulty in his love life. And we don't have to get into all about Braum, and we don't have to know all about Braum in order to be able to appreciate his use of the Sword Whisper. That's something that you can do. It's not harder for that. Truth of Braum, he's so fucking Braum. Like, yep. So like, look, it was an experiment that I tried and it didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. I can definitely admit that. I'm still not completely unhappy with some of the elements that came up with it, but I can also say that I would probably think quite hard before I would try to do something like that again. But inserting items or references that are vague to other games, that's fine. But don't necessarily transpose entire characters. And if you're a PC, take the opportunity to try something new. I really encourage you to. I believe that I've told the story on... chat keeps eating your posts. Yeah, there's might be something with Twitch. I had a lot of fun playing a sequel game where the characters had to be inspired by the prior campaign's characters. The only person who didn't have fun or wasn't much fun was someone who played essentially a daughter or clone of her old character. She wasn't allowing there to be any new surprises for some reason, so it was kind of boring. So this is exactly what I was about to bring up. I did actually do this. The Changeling LARP that I first started running, we ended it. We played other things, and then we had enough people ask us to play Changeling again that we decided that we would do a sequel. We would say that this campaign would take place several years later. Nobody was allowed to play a character that they'd played before, and nobody was allowed to play a character that was related to their previous character. You could be related to someone else's character potentially, but it couldn't be your own. Which meant that we sort of had an established universe and established rules that the players were familiar with. But it was... there has been one hot take this stream. But it was a way for people to sort of experience the universe in a new fashion. And we had one player who insisted that what he wanted to do was play a friend of his old characters. Actually, he insisted on playing his old character, to which we said no, especially because his character died in the last session of that game, and he was frustrated by that. But death's not always easy. But then he was like, okay, well, can I play my character's like friend, like an old war buddy of his? And we didn't want to let him do that until he eventually is like, well, look, I'll be honest with you, I either want to play this character or I don't want to play at all. And we were like, all right, fine. And then he came in and he essentially cloned his old character right down to the beginning. It was like he slipped directly into his old character's thing and just changed the name. And he ended up being pretty miserable because everyone didn't really want to talk to him because they were like, I already know your character. You're playing the same one as you're playing before. And honestly, it's just not that interesting because he was also trying to make this character work in a new setting, which was difficult because his frame of reference for himself for that character was 10 years earlier. And it was like he was lagging, caught in the past. He played a troll warrior. Yeah. He was a troll grump. This was, remember, 2nd edition Changeling, so grump meant old as opposed to your outlook on life. It was your age. And then he played a new troll grump. Basically almost even the exact same sheet. I wasn't the one who approved the sheet. I probably wouldn't have approved it. And he just didn't have fun. It just wasn't fun for him. And that's a rough thing for a player to handle, and it was rough for the storytellers to handle as well. I mean, you say bad nerd. The thing is, he had an idea of what he wanted to do, and then he was like, this is what I want. And he committed to a hostage situation that he was like, I'm either playing this character or I'm not playing at all. And we like him, we enjoyed his company and his presence. And we also wanted to make sure that there were enough players. And we were worried that if he didn't play, that some other players might be like, oh, well, if he's not playing, then I won't play either. And we shouldn't have done that. We should have just let him not play. And then hopefully he would have been like, no, actually, I really do want to play. And then essentially calling his bluff, and he might have created a different character. But it didn't work out. Look, the reason why I am sitting here and the reason why I feel like I can talk on this show is because I've made a shit ton of mistakes and I keep making them. You will not find me ever claiming that I have game mastering figured out, because I fucking don't. Nobody does. And it's always evolving. There are times where I'll finish a session and I will be like, no, I completely blew it. And other people will be like, no, it was great. And I will be convinced that I blew it. And that's something that I have to work on for myself. But there will be other times where I'll finish a session and I'll just know that I could have done it better. That I with a little more effort, a little more prep, or a little, or just a different change in a decision or two that I made throughout the session, and I could have made it better. So yeah, I mean, I have fucked up. Is this what Cybernoctis is based on? Without being able to get into too much about what our plans are for season 3, I will say that the end of season 2 of LARPs is meant to be a win moment for people to feel good about Arthur, because I don't think people will necessarily think of what would have happened and what we might be able to get a chance to see for season 3 is, and we'll see, all plot lines are up in the air. All can be questioned, but it depends, because if I'm writing this completely true to form, there will be issues with Arthur playing an old character in a new setting. So that's strange. Yeah, like I see that Requiem Lost wrote better late than never, and it's showing up on stream, but it isn't in my chat. That's weird. Yeah. Don't know what's going on there. I think Twitch is having issues with the chat right now. Yeah, because also I didn't see that. Maybe I just have to refresh my stream chat. Let's try that. Get my chat back up here. There we go. Yeah, I'm hoping that it might just be that I had to refresh my chat, but I'll actually keep an eye out now on the chat, not just in the chat window, but now also the chat that's going out over the stream to make sure. Requiem, we're talking about the importance of session 3 of allowing your players to alter their character sheets before the end or before the beginning of session 4, of checking in with your players to make sure that they're enjoying themselves, or checking in with your game master to see if they're enjoying themselves. Because session 3 is kind of like a critical time where you've played enough to know what's going on. But anyway. And Aragorn's back. Or never left. We're not sure. Yeah, I think Twitch just might be having some issues, which is understandable. So yeah. Are there other questions? Are there other kind of comments? Are there things that people want to work on? Because I'm very happy to lay down those fat beats. I mean, who doesn't want to lay down fat beats? I can even just why people haven't already disconnected, I will never know. Because you probably should. You're glued to the shoulder shimmy. Well, you shouldn't be. You should. You really shouldn't be. Oh. But yeah. So it's a thing. You need a time fill. It can do you a time fill. It's more like I'm interested what people say, and like the only suggestion that I got, I can always pull back from other RPGClinic posts, so I'm not super worried about it. This is your first day watching Twitch? Well, that's a pretty cool thing to be doing. Hi. I know when I'm doing a lot more fluid character sheet for X number of sessions, I like to check in with my players and ask what they're aiming to accomplish role-wise and what is keeping them from doing the effect that they want, work with them and try to make the adjustments. Always check, right? But a good way of doing that, and one of the questions that I ask my players, and I'm sure it drives them bonkers sometimes, but something that I do try to do, is I ask, what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want? Because sometimes someone will say, oh, well, I want to be able to, max out my backstab, but I also want to, and I'm like, okay, what do you actually want? And then the answer is, I want to be able to kill people without, from stealth. And I'm like, okay. And then we can work towards finding a way to let you live that fantasy out. Try to not necessarily attack these problems straight up from mechanics, because not everybody is as familiar with the mechanics as they would need to be in order to create the character that they want right away. That's part of your job as a game master, is to be able to guide people through the mechanics, although it is not your job to be the mechanics expert at all times. But and also sometimes you'll have somebody who'll say like, well, okay, well, what I really want is, I want to use this particular ability on this particular NPC. And I'll be like, okay, but what is it that you want to have happen? And they'll say, well, I want this NPC to let us into the building. And I can say, okay, well, what you're doing is you're trying to use a intimidate, and intimidate could work in this particular situation, but what you're really doing here is you're just trying to convince them to let you in, and that's more of a persuade action. Sometimes people just don't understand what they're doing, but the exact thing happens in character creation. Finding out and drilling down what it is that the player actually wants to have, what their fantasy is the important bit. And that's kind of a strong tactic to take, because in general, people have motivations and meanings. Sometimes it's not even about what their character wants, it's about what the player wants. I want to be able to do something that nobody else at the table can do. I want to be able to have a moment in the game where nobody else can accomplish something, but I can do it instead. And they don't even really care what that thing is. They just want to feel special in that one moment, and you can help them find that. Sometimes you'll have a player who says, I want to play a social character. And then you're like, well, what do you mean by that? And what they're really saying is, what I want is I want to play a character that's completely unlike the character that I played before. Or you'll have somebody who'll say, I want to play the character who everybody else, all the other PCs will like. And then in that case, you kind of have to drill down and say, like, I can't force everybody to like you. So what is it that you really want? And then it turns out that it's more like, well, I want to play somebody who gets along well with this particular band of people, in which case I'll say, great, talk to the other players. Trying to solve it using your character sheet isn't going to work nearly as well as just mentioning the other players. Hey, so, I don't want to be at odds with you anymore. I want to be friends. So let's do this together. I've just made an example of all three of my players for Star Wars, by the way, at random. But it's about what their emotional kicks are. It's about what their fantasies are. And finding out what those are means that you can actually get around to giving them what they want. Because oftentimes it's not really about, I want to demonstrate systems mastery. Some people, absolutely, that's what they want to do. But for a lot of people, they're trying to think in a systems fashion. Well, what they really want isn't something that's buried in the system. Or they don't understand the system well enough to be able to accomplish what they're actually looking for. Everyone says, I continue to plot my campaign where character creation takes place over in game sessions driven initially by the instincts of the characters. I think that's an interesting approach. Real Brickwall says, knowing what your player wants to happen is also important for games with complex resolution for mechanics so that you don't turn a success into a failure. Remember, just ask your players, so tell me what you want, what you really, really want. This is a very good point, because you can also make assumptions that will turn out wrong. Like if somebody is intimidating another person, you're like, all right, roll intimidation. And they're like, great. And then you roll 6 successes and you're like, the person is so frightened that they give up the code for everything. But then the player might be like, but I didn't want them to be frightened of me. I wanted them to be frightened of something else. Because now that particular NPC will never trust me again. They're too afraid of me. I've ruined my chances of becoming their friend. And in that case, that's because you made an assumption as to what the player actually wanted. So sometimes it is important to drill that down. I mean, I do want a Zigga Zigga. Spice Girls still cost me $240 at one point, so, you know. I'm not bitter. He said, convincing no one. Thanks for following, Madunkig. Am I pronouncing that right? Madunkig? Or is it Madunkig or Madunkig? I do want to make sure that I pronounce things as well as I possibly can, and I still know that I fail sometimes, which is sad, but oh well. Mad Unky G. Ha ha. All right. Mad Unky G, there is also this. If you are at all interested, we do actual plays. We just started a new campaign, so it's kind of a good time to sort of step in and see what we're doing. Those are on Sundays, 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So essentially, whatever your time is now, but on Sunday. Mad Unky G is a great name. I just wish that I had pronounced it correctly. Although you can change the capitalization of your name on Twitch. It is possible to do that so that it more accurately represents what you're looking for, if that's something that's interesting to you. Someone else is going to have to link to how to do that. But yeah, you can change the capitalization of your name and how it appears. Like for instance, when I say something as RPGClinic, then I still have the first 4 letters capitalized because we said it that way. So, yeah, if you have the day free, if you make it, that's great. We play for about 3 hours. We have video on demand for everything. Real Brick Wall put a great synopsis of the previous episode up on our website, rpgclinic.com. Question for you on the same topic. What approach would you use for that player that has a really hard time narrowing their view? Been a problem for me in the past. So, what do you mean by narrowing their view, Requiem Lost? It might be a reference to something before, which I've missed. This has happened in the past. There it is, under display name to change capitalization. See, Zen Robo's just got it going on. Oh, I want everyone to like me. Okay. So when you're saying that, what approach would you use for the player that has a really hard time narrowing their view? So let's say that you, so first of all, what you don't want to do is, to put somebody on the spot, in front of everybody else to like a significant degree. You don't want to spend 20 minutes at the table with every other player watching you try to drill down for somebody else. It's not incredibly important one individual attempt. At that point, you don't need a GM. You need a marriage counselor. Woof. It's okay if somebody doesn't get everything that they could possibly want every single time. So if something is going to take too long, if you can't articulate it well enough in the first bit, if it's not something that you can kind of get to immediately, it's okay to let it slide for now. Just make sure to talk to them afterwards. Because also sometimes doing it in private can be more productive. Especially if somebody is trying to say something akin to, I'll give you an example from a game that I ran a long time ago. If you have someone say, every time I try to make a battle plan, this other player comes along and makes one, and everybody just does what she asked because they like her and they're used to listening to her, and they never listen to me, even though like my character's supposed to be a strategist and I worked really hard on this battle plan, but everyone just goes along with what she says. And this player wasn't comfortable bringing it up in front of everybody because what he was doing was essentially complaining about another player, not necessarily saying that this other player was deliberately doing something bad, but because they were like, this player is making it difficult for me to enact my fantasy of being a strategist. To which I then pointed out to this player, I was like, okay, well, what is it that you really want? What is it that's important? And I couldn't do that in game, even though this player even wanted to bring it up in game. And I was like, you know what? And I pulled them out of game. I pulled them into another room and we talked about it separate from the other players. And then what it really came down to is this person didn't say it outright, but it sort of became clear to me what this person wanted was to be seen as a strategic player, as a strategic genius was kind of how, unfortunately, kind of how I pictured it. And I made the point that if other player characters didn't care about things like battle tactics, if their characters, I don't even mean their players, if their characters weren't disciplined military types, they were never going to pay that much attention to tactics in the first place. And the advantage that this other player had was that her plans were very simple. You're going to go around back, we're going to break into the front, and we'll go and do it. And people were like, great, that's something I can understand, and we can get to it, we can go for it, and we don't have to spend the next 30 minutes discussing it. And this player had things like, I have a chart and I have a map and here's the map and here are the points of ingress and egress and this is what we can do and we'll shore up our positions here, literally. And this person had made a lot of assumptions and had gone over with another game master at the time, had gone over the whole layout of the thing so that they can come up with a strategic plan. And I said that I was really sorry that they'd put in a lot of effort and that nobody seemed to care about it, but that wasn't something that was ever going to change. Nobody wanted to sit through a 45-minute battle plan reenactment. People wanted to actually get to the battle. And I said that what we can do for this is because this other GM seemed very interested in creating this battle plan. I was like, you know what? Find the characters who are interested in joining you for a surgical strike as opposed to just a general battle, and then run it with the GM who's actually interested in doing that sort of thing, and then you'll be able to get that what you want. And he was like, no, what I really wanted was I wanted everybody to see me as this strategic guy. I want people to see this because there was also an election happening in the game at the time. And this player wanted to shore up support for their electoral bid. Basically, a bid to be the leader of their kind of base. For Changeling, there was an election to see who was going to become the leader of the Freehold. And I was like, then you're not going to win votes like this because players aren't going to respond to that. And I worked with him on another plan to try to win votes. Now, he didn't win. The other thing that I kind of was trying to impart upon this player was don't pin all your hopes on winning this election because I can't guarantee that you are going to win, because I also knew that there was no chance in hell that this player was going to win ever. But I made them sort of realize that if they wanted to improve their standing, that there were other things that they could do. There were other tactics that they could try that didn't involve forcing everybody to listen to him talk for 30 minutes at a time. I realized that there was a certain amount of irony in saying that, considering that so far I've been talking for about 90 minutes and people are listening to me. But so the ways that I did it, Requiem Lost, to answer your question, which I realized I went into a long tangent with this example, was I separated the player from the rest of the game so that they could truly voice their concerns. It also meant that I could take the time with this player that I needed to find out exactly what he wanted. And time isn't something that is necessarily a thing that you can devote to in the middle of a game session. I reassured the player that what I wanted was to make the game enjoyable for him and for everybody else. And I think that he appreciated when I was like, I know that this is I know that what you're trying to do, and I think that it's an interesting effort, but I also, you need to see it from their perspective. The game lasts for 3 hours. You talk to them for 30 minutes, and what they really wanted was to actually have the exciting combat sequence and not try to avoid all combat. They wanted the combat. So trying to make sure that they can see it not only from their own perspective, but from everyone else's perspective can sometimes work. But then also asking the question, and asking questions around it. So if I ask, what do you really want? And they don't give me the answer, then sometimes I can say, is it that you want this? Or is it that you are attempting to try this? So it's more phrasing it in terms of like, I want to understand, as opposed to you need to make me understand, is also a good way to make sure that people don't immediately clam up or get frustrated. And sometimes in guiding them through, they can change their minds. So it is a tactic that you can attempt, that you can try. And Lo, you're not necessarily at the last minute. I mean, I'll end the stream if everybody's kind of like checked out and not caring, but something that Real Brick Wall said, marriage counseling is my least favorite GM activity and I've had to do it and it's awful. Yeah. But I would also say that if I had, so I've obviously this has come up with me. I've made no secret about the fact that my longest running campaign ever what ended because two of the players were in a long-term relationship and ended it. And it was not because the game wasn't like, obviously the game had grown quite long, but it was it just unceremoniously ended because just the two didn't want to be in the same room anymore. If I'd known then, or if I had the courage then to do what I would do now, would be that if I had noticed that there were relationship issues that were interfering with the game, I would end the game. I'd find a way to end it, hopefully as well as I could. You know, I'd be like, all right, so we're going to close this game out. And I would be honest with people. I'd be like, you know what? Clearly clearly the two of you have some things that you need to work through. And this role-playing game is not one of them. So we're going to take a break. And we'll come back when we can. It's over like your relationship. But it's just not worth it. And also, it's kind of a dick move to put your friends through that. If you are on the outs with your relationship partner, but then you make it about everybody, like you bring everybody else into it, or it's okay and it's healthy to have disagreements with people. But if you are dragging in your relationship into your role-playing game in that way, if you're bringing all the baggage that comes with being in a relationship and taking it out on everybody else by doing that, just don't. Just don't. It's a dick move. It is totally a sad affair on both sides, completely. I know that it's hard because often when you're in a relationship that's going wrong, it sort of feels like that's the most important thing in the world, and it can be for you at that moment in time. And it can feel difficult to let that go. But it's also unfair to expect that everybody else has to put up with it. Look at all the drama I have. Look, participate. It's not even participate. It's look, pay attention to me. Is often what it is. I can also say that it is one of the least attractive. One of the least attractive things that I can notice in somebody is to try and drag their friends through all their relationship drama. I mean, it's natural to know this now, but like, if you're constantly fighting with your partner in front of me, then you realize that all I'm thinking when I leave is, why on earth are these people together? So if you bring your bad day into a game, it's a dick move. There have been days where I told everyone I can't do this right now, going to bow out for today. So I think it's totally admissible to admit to people like, hey, look, I've had a rough day today. So just if I'm a little subdued at the start, that's probably why. And I think that it can take some courage, but I think it's totally the right call to be like, you know what, folks, I just can't do this right now. I can't do this today. I'm not in that space. Now, like I said before, it can be very easy for you to just say like, oh, I don't want to do it, even if you totally could. And in fact, maybe it would be a good idea for you to like relax and play a game. It's very easy to be lazy, and a game takes a certain amount of commitment, and I don't think that you should take that commitment completely lightly. But I do think that if you're having an absolutely miserable time and you're sitting there like this the entire game and you just can't get out of it, it is not worth you being like, nobody will notice it. Nobody will care. Yes, we notice, we care, and you're dragging everybody else down. So it's better to just end it at that point. But you can mention it. You can mention it out loud. Like, it's one thing that I'm trying to do is that when people ask me like, hey, how'd your day go? I try not to be like, oh, it was fine, even if it was terrible. But what I also try to do is I don't immediately be like, oh, my day was fucking horrible. Let me tell you all about all the wonderful, horrible things that happened to me today. Because maybe it's not the appropriate time. Like, if I'm having a one-on-one conversation with somebody who I interact with regularly, then maybe they actually care and want to hear about the difficulties of my day. But if it's like, we're here to role play, you don't really want to listen to me talk about how horrible my day was for 20 minutes. So I might just be honest and I'll be like, you know what, it was a rough day, but I'm hoping it's going to get better right now. Like, let's make it clear that my goal is to have a good day from now on and not dwell on the bad day before. But it also kind of preps people and they sort of understand like, oh, he's coming in from a position of frustration. So we'll be there. I can't complain because I wouldn't be able to stop. It's got my go-to in 2020. That's fair. Some folks just can't handle being miserable on their own. That's also fair. The thing is that it's like, I genuinely care and I do want to hear sometimes about people's problems, but then there are also times where somebody will message me, they'll bring up problems and I'll be like, the only time that you ever talk to me is to complain. And that takes a lot of emotional labor for me to be able to process that. And if the only time that you ever interact with me is to complain, that can be frustrating. I remember that when I was running one particular LARP, I had a player who every time she showed up to game, she would have to complain for about 5 minutes at the start about how tired she was because she had worked all day that day. And eventually I pointed out to her, most people had worked all day that day because it was a Friday evening, that if she was truly too tired to play, then I would totally understand, but that she probably should just leave. And that if she couldn't make the effort to be to try to make the game pleasant for everybody, then she should just make sure to try not to drag everybody else down. Because when I say that she'd complain for 5 minutes, I'm not exaggerating. And she'd make sure that everybody knew how tired she was and exactly why. And it wasn't actually helping anybody, and it certainly wasn't helping her. So it is really rough when that happens, and I think that it's completely understandable to just tell somebody, you know what, like, when I ask how your day's gone and you tell me, that's because I asked and I wanted to know. But when you volunteer how your day's gone constantly and it's not really a constructive moment for us, then just don't do it right now. We'll listen to it later. But like, when everybody's trying to get into character and all you want to talk about is your shitty job, just don't. Just don't. I mean, this person also is somebody who I ended up having to have a talk with because she would fall asleep in game a lot. Like, every game she would sit down on a couch and then eventually she would just doze off. And then afterwards she'd be like, well, maybe it's because your game is boring, which I loved hearing. And I was like, well, everybody else is actively trying to participate and you are waiting for me to come to you. And I can't. There are 30 players who I'm directly responsible for, and I can't focus on you all the time. And, you know, at first I was just more concerned. I was like, hey, like, if you're falling asleep, like, are you okay? Are you well? Like, do you perhaps have a medical condition that we should be aware of? But then also I'd be like, you know, if you're falling asleep, clearly this is not a good time for you to game. And that's really too bad, but maybe this isn't the game for you. And she was like, no, it's the only game that I'm in. And I want to keep playing. And I'm like, that's great. But if you're falling asleep in game, that's nothing that I can help. And I can't reschedule the game just for you. So Real Brick Wall, see, like, that's what I was trying to find out, right? Like, I was trying to find out, like, are you narcoleptic? Because it's like my sister was narcoleptic for quite a while until they diagnosed her with celiac disease. And she would just doze off. Like, she it wouldn't be her fault. She would try to stay awake and she just couldn't. And I was wondering if that was the deal with her. And no, it was just because she was like, no, I've had a long day at work. I'm tired. I show up and then, like, I'm bored. So I just sit down and I don't do anything. And I'm like, well, in a LARP, you have to make your own fun, which is one of the things that I kind of wish that I had, like, on a loop playing, that in a LARP, you have to create your own fun. No one is going to make you have fun. You have to do it yourself. In tabletop, it's a lot easier for the game master to focus on you when you need it, but in a LARP, they can't. So often, depends on the kind of LARP and all of that, obviously. It's not narcolepsy. He just can't regulate his sleep schedule due to a compounding of smaller factors. Yeah, so yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a health issue. It can also just be a life issue, which I get. But there's a difference between, like, I show up and I had rotten sleep the night before and I'm going to do my best, to I am always tired during game. I'm always going to complain about it and I won't do anything to try to make it better. I remember even that she was like, I'm not going to drink coffee though, because if I drink coffee, then I won't be able to sleep tonight. And I was like, I completely respect and understand that. Like, that's great. But if you need stimulants to stay awake, either take the stimulants or don't. But, like, you know, won't lie, I've fallen asleep in a game, but that was only a couple of times when the focus was on someone else and I was not involved. Also long nights. It happens and I usually excuse myself. Like, yeah, I totally understand how it could happen. Like, I completely get it. I mean, oftentimes it's also, it happens less in my games because I keep my games small so that I can devote more individual attention to players. But if you're in a game and you have 5 other player characters and they're taking care of something and it's not something that your character can deal with at that point in time, fall asleep. It's totally cool. If it's an online game and there isn't a camera on you and, like, it's just super easy for you to get distracted, I get it. I totally get it and I understand. My main issue is when it happens all the time. And if it happens all the time, and you're not willing to do anything to fix it, then you should probably bow out of the game. Again, quitting, one of the best things you can possibly do for a game. If you are not in correct working order to play in a game, you shouldn't play. If a game is incompatible with your schedule, you shouldn't play. And they can't reschedule for you, you shouldn't play. If a game has a player that you absolutely loathe and can't possibly sit down with for 10 minutes, let alone the hours required to play, then you can't play in that game. It's something that people just have to start recognizing, is that not all games will work for all players. Even, like, in your own friend group, not all games are going to work for all players. You know, and it can be tough and you can feel left out, and that's absolutely, like, I feel for you. But sometimes that's the way it goes. Boring people get bored is a truism I don't really believe, but I always want to tell people who complain about boredom in a game. I would say, Aragorn, that to me, if you get bored easily, then my next question would be, what are you doing to try to not be bored? And if it's literally, no matter what I try, I can't get engaged, then I totally get it and you should quit. But if it's, well, I haven't tried anything, people should come to me, then my response is like, well, you know, you make your own fun. Because you do. You absolutely do. Role-playing is an active hobby. It is an active activity. It is not a passive activity. And to treat it like a passive activity, to expect entertainment to just wash over you, it's not television, right? It's the equivalent of starting a video game and then not pushing any buttons and waiting for the game to entertain you, because it's not necessarily going to do that. if that's what you're looking for. Now, people can enjoy watching people play video games. People can enjoy watching people play role-playing games. Like, that's totally fine. But if you are expected to be a player at that game and you're wondering why you're not having fun, but you're also not actually trying, but yeah, in a film, you can sit there and the film is crafted to be entertaining for you so that you don't have to do anything except watch and enjoy. But a role-playing game is crafted to be a community experience. And it isn't fair to expect everybody else to entertain you like it's a movie, especially because they're all coming up with it on the fly. ADHD is a thing that can cause people to get bored or distracted easily, but in those cases, it's good for the GM or storyteller to know. So I want to make it crystal clear that if you get bored and you don't do anything about it, that's on you. But that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means that you are in the wrong game. If you have a medical condition that is causes you to get distracted easily or whatever, but you don't tell anybody that you have this medical condition, or alternately, you tell everybody that you have this medical condition and you expect all of them to just bend over backwards strictly to accommodate you, and you, again, don't do anything yourself to try to fix it, then that is a problem that you need to solve. I believe that it is important to make efforts to make games accessible to everybody, and that includes people who are aneurotypical. But I also don't believe that it is an appropriate response to say, I have an issue, and then wait for everybody else to take up the entire slack for you. That isn't fair. As an analogy, if you use a wheelchair, it isn't fair to roll up to a building without wheelchair accessibility. That isn't fair to you, right? Like, a building should make an effort to make sure that they are accessible to you however they can. But it is also unfair for you to roll up to a building, stop, and say, one of you has to get out and push me around while I shop. That's not fair, right? Like, there's a reasonable accommodation that they can make to make sure that you can get around the store, but they are under no obligation to provide somebody who will push you around so that and make the decisions for you. Check out. If there was a problem, you'll also have it. Check out my hook while the DJ revolves it. It hits too close. So now there are differences, right? Like, if you approach a building, or if you approach a store and you say, is it possible for somebody to help me because I need help? Then that's at least you trying. You're making an effort. You are asking for assistance. You are showing your appreciation for that assistance. That is all stuff that you can do. But to pull it back to games, if you say, guys, I get bored easily, that's not enough, right? You need to be able to say, here are the things that keep me engaged in a game. Here are the things that to watch out for. I apologize if there are times where I look distracted, and I'll do my best to not do so. If I believe that I'm way too distracted in a game, I'll get up and leave. Like, these are things that you can also make clear so that we know to accommodate you, but at the same time, we also know that you are making an effort to meet everybody else in that particular circumstance. So it is a thing. So, like, ADHD, totally understand that it may not be something that you have total control over. Totally understand that at times it's going to disrupt things, and like that's not your fault. What I don't get is when somebody uses that to essentially excuse behavior that doesn't belong at a table. So, in much the same way that I'll have, I've known people to say, you know what, I'm just a grumpy person, and I'm mean to people, and that's just who I am. And if people don't like who I am, then that's on them. And I'm like, no, because if you're just being a dick to everybody, that's on you. Just saying this is who I am isn't enough. Everyone says that's actually one of the reasons it can be a good idea to encourage yourself to go to game if you're feeling kind of out of it, because you can put varying levels of energy and get back what you put in. You can be mellow if you only have the energy to be mellow, or you can start low and end up high as the game energizes you. So that's absolutely true. There are sessions that I've played online which have started really mellow and then have become more energized as the players become ready to engage more, or as I get my own energy levels up. And then at the end, it's fine. Hello, Omen Noob. In all honesty, I do have ADHD, and since we play games at night, I avoid taking my meds or I can't sleep. I let the storyteller know about this and tell them, hey, if I zone it, just give me a whack and I'll refocus. Let me know if it becomes a problem. So there you go, Requiem Lost. What you did was you stated what you stated an issue, stated what you what they can do to help resolve the issue, stated what you will try to do to help resolve the issue, preemptively thanked them essentially for that, and also specifically volunteered that if there was a problem, that you were open to having them talk about it. That means that you've done what you can, right? And that's excellent. That's exactly what I would ask for in this particular game. And that means that also if I was running a game and I noticed that somebody was distracted, but they had previously said that to me, then I wouldn't immediately be like, well, what the fuck's going on? Or I wouldn't immediately worry that I was being a bad GM. I'd be like, oh, this sort of thing. And then I'd just be like, hey, you okay? Check in with them and then move on. Now I know what the steps are to take. That's a helpful thing for me to know. That's what I want. What I don't want is for someone to be like, yeah, this happens sometimes, and to leave it alone. I fidget, but it's okay to folks to flag when I'm doing something distracting. I fidget as well. I fidget all the time, unfortunately, and I realize that people should probably tell me if it's distracting to them. I tend to fiddle with my pencil, sometimes with my safety cards, but I've been corrected to not be wiggling red or yellow cards around because those are important signals. Yeah, so like that's a thing that if I will use my, here. This is the back of my license and my back of my medical insurance. So here, like, so nobody can steal my private information this way. Ha 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 ha. So if I see somebody fiddling with a red or yellow card, then I start wondering whether, is it because you're fidgeting or is it because you're hesitating to pull a card to show it? And so that's why I asked Kate to not fiddle with those cards specifically, but I don't mind if she fiddles with anything else. And she can fiddle with a green card all she likes, as long as, she's feeling green cardy as opposed to red cardy or yellow cardy. So Requiem Lost, stacking dice. The only problem that I have with stacking dice at a table, I actually have asked players in the past to not stack dice, is because if you are stacking dice and they all fall, then that's a big noise and a big distraction from everybody. And also it can be sort of strange if you're like, okay, so it's time to roll, and then they're like, but I've stacked my dice. So sometimes I will ask. Now, obviously, if it's just a little bit of stacking, if it's just like making a small little 3 stack of D6s, that's not a problem. I'm talking about like when somebody takes all of their D20s, all 15 of them that they own, and they try to make as tall a stack as possible. Then that's just like, that gets to be too much. If you get a fidget cube, by the way, fidget cubes, try to get the original one. Don't get a knockoff one. The knockoff ones are so they're unsatisfying, but also like the original ones, clearly a lot of work went into them, and the knockoffs, they're not. Lo says, in the olden days when I was a player more often, I would draw at the table. It sort of weirded out folks in the beginning until they realized I would be drawing characters or scenes from the game itself and could follow along just fine, but that required dialogue before sessions to see if no one was bothered by this. So Lo, like that's, I've also had people draw during my games, quite a bit actually. One of the games that I ran had 2 people who were studying illustration. So they would draw all the time, and they would draw characters any which way that they were doing. I remember at one point I quite immaturely got really frustrated because they drew an NPC of mine with a cucumber in its nose, or a pickle in its nose, and it was like some kind of strange meme that they were calling Veggie Nostrum. And I was just like, but my character would never jam something in their nose. And I should have just let it fucking go, and I didn't. I was total like weird dick for that for like 45 minutes. But yeah, like it was just like, I got used to it because they could still pay attention to the game while they were drawing, and that was great. But at one point they were doing homework in the middle of the game. They were like, I have to finish this drawing for class. And I was like, can you still play and draw your homework at the same time? And they reassured me that they could, that it was like a technical thing, that they were just trying to like do the shading and all this, that is more time consuming than it was like focus that they needed. And one of them handled it really well and the other one did not. And so eventually I ended the game early because I was like, look, it's really important that you get your homework done, and you know, you're just not paying attention. And she was like, no, I know, I'm really sorry. And she was totally sorry. She thought she could play, but she was struggling with the homework. So I was like, no, not today, but normally it was fine. Everyone says it's also possible to communicate symptoms without disclosing a specific diagnosis if you're uncomfortable. Hey, I need to stand up a lot and pace. Don't take that as necessarily in character, please, or something. Yep, totally. I don't need to know your diagnosis. And I'm also not a doctor. So I can't diagnose you. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychoanalyst. So you don't need to necessarily get into the whys. What is important is the what can I do? What can you do? And what can I look out for? And what are ways in which I can help you? That's what I care about. The actual name of what's going on, or the excuses do not matter to me. What matters to me is results. Now, that's not everybody, and I know that that's a very like sort of thing to say, like self-aggrandizing, but like it's true. If you have to give me bad news, thank you, Lo. That's really appreciated. If you have to give me bad news, I'd rather you just give me the bad news instead of giving me a 10-minute preamble as to why this bad news is happening. It's okay, I can take it. Nobody at work is in this chat right now, right? I can spin a D8 for like 2.7 minutes. That's pretty impressive. That is god level. Yeah. If it's got enough weight, I imagine that it makes it a bit easier. But yeah, like that's kind of like the important thing to remember and to hold on to is if there's something that you need the table to know, tell them. But know what you need to tell them, what you want to tell them, and what you don't need to come back. Yeah, it all comes back to use your word hole. But if there's things that you don't want escaping your word hole, they don't have to. They really don't. You are under no obligation to do that. Enjoy letting people interact with the game, and enjoy letting people interact with you without needing to bear all of your secrets if you don't want them thrown out there. You don't need to do that. That's not required. I gotta thank Kate for getting this chill playlist, which I totally stole for this. Use your mind and then your word hole, and you'll have good times. Don't let your mind go too crazy though. Don't secret all your bears. I mean, maybe you have to secret all your bears. I don't know. What if you have contraband bears? Folks, this is great. I really appreciate people coming in here, but I think I probably have to do is just start RPG Clinic a little bit later. Maybe 4:30 is a bit too early for some people. But we are reaching the end of this particular RPG Clinic. I know Kung Fu Fenris. I know that's a jerk thing for me to do. Or maybe I just have to plan for RPG Clinic to last. So we'll have to see. But it also kind of comes down to what I have to do in the day. So maybe I'll just make RPG Clinic last longer. Who knows? But for now, I do have something else that's going to come up, so I do have to go. Tomorrow, there's going to be Punchy. That's at 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time over at twitch.tv/Elizabeth A. Neal. There should be a stream on Saturday as well. New to the channel, so Neophet, if you are new to the channel, then now's a good time to listen that on Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so this would be 30 minutes ago, wherever your time zone is right now. We have just started a new Star Wars Edge of the Empire campaign, which you can see me run and my players play. That's every Sunday, so that would be a good time to tune in, honestly. And then, hey, if you follow the channel, it'll tell you. That's kind of the great things about that. How dare I not bend to our whims? Yeah, that's a bit long. That's a bit kind of confusing to throw out there, but we'll see. Oh, cool, Neophet. So if you're new to the channel, the best place, if you want to ask questions, you can always ask questions on our Discord. The Discord is a place where I'm constantly checking. You can get advice from me or from anyone else on the channel as well. And then sometimes I'll pick topics from the Discord and I'll bring them up here. I should have done more of that. To be honest, I'm just out of practice with this because it's been a month since I've run one of these things. So it's kind of great that I got a chance to come back, but we'll see what happens for the next Thursday. At any rate, keep enjoying your games. Use your damn word hole. And if you don't see me streaming before then, I will see you on Sunday. Thanks for coming in.